Marilou and Kenton had been together for a year, and their hearts were full of dreams for the future. The year had gone by in the blink of an eye, and although they still had a lot to achieve, they were already planning their wedding. The young couple dreamed of owning a home where they could raise their little family. For now, however, they lived in a cozy, albeit small, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, where the noise from the street sometimes interrupted the quiet of their evenings together. One ordinary day, as the sun was playing in the sky, Marilou went to the clinic to collect her test results. She had no suspicions because she felt fine. It seemed that nothing could ruin their happy moment. What was supposed to be a routine procedure quickly turned into a nightmare that would change her life forever. When Marilou entered the doctor's office, she was overcome with excitement. The doctor, tall and stern, examined the results and immediately told her the diagnosis. "Unfortunately, you have syphilis," he said, and his words sounded like a thunderclap. Marilou felt the world slowly crumble beneath her feet, and all the dreams she and Kenton had built were beginning to melt away. "This is not a mistake," the doctor continued, trying to look as professional as possible. "We need to start treatment immediately." The doctor's words, although reassuring in the context of the success of the therapy, only exacerbated her internal fears. Marilou began to think about her life and how she got into this situation. She was overcome with panic. How could this have happened? How am I going to tell Kenton? And my parents? She was shocked and did not know what to do next. The doctor tried to reassure her, explaining that everything was treatable, but it was not easy for Marilou. She could not shake the feeling of hopelessness. When Marilou returned home, she could not calm down. Every step to her apartment seemed harder than ever before. She knew she had to talk to Kenton, but the words wouldn't come out of her mouth. She and Kenton had plans for the future, and suddenly she felt that future falling apart into thousands of pieces. She needed to talk, to find someone who understood her, who could support her in this difficult moment. She called her best friend Louise, hoping for support. When Louise answered, Marilou tried to sound calm, but her voice trembled treacherously. She couldn't find the right words to convey what had happened to her. "Louise, I need your help," she finally said. Her friend, always sensitive and attentive, immediately realized that something was wrong. During the conversation, Louise tried to calm Maria down, convincing her that everything was not so bad. She assured her that she would find a good doctor for an additional consultation so that Marilou could get a second professional opinion on the results. "Don't worry, I'm with you," Louise repeated, trying to instill in her friend the belief that everything would be fine. In the end, Louisa suggested that she see her gynecologist, which was some comfort to Marilou. She knew that the doctor Louisa recommended had a good reputation, and this gave her some hope. However, even this hope could not completely relieve the burden on her heart. When Marilou returned home, still full of anxiety, it was hard to bring herself to enter the apartment. She knew Kenton was waiting there, her love, her support. But what could she say? How could she start this conversation? It was a new day, but for Marilou, it brought only bitter thoughts about what would happen next. When she opened the door, Marilou saw Kenton, who was preparing dinner, concentrating on something of his own. There was a fragrant aroma in the air, and the whole apartment seemed to be filled with comfort. But Marilou did not feel this coziness. Instead, her heart was beating faster and her mind was in a state of confusion. She sat down on the kitchen chair, watching Kenton, and suddenly noticed that he was smiling as he talked to some stranger who had appeared on the doorstep. Her smile seemed familiar, but something about it made Mary feel cold in her heart. Was she Kenton's wife? Or perhaps just a friend? But her presence at this moment, when Marilou was experiencing the greatest tragedy of her life, only added to her anxiety. Marilou felt her mouth go dry. All thoughts of talking to Kenton, of telling him about her illness, disappeared, replaced by new doubts. Could Kenton be cheating on her? Did she have the right to ask him questions at a time when she was in such a difficult situation? Is it possible that their whole dream of a family, of a future together, could turn into nothing if she doesn't pull herself together? She realized that she could not leave it for later. At that moment, it seemed that all the fears and worries that had previously been weighing on her heart became even heavier. Every emotion merged into one loud cry inside her. She knew that she had to find the strength to talk to Kenton, even if it would lead to irreversible consequences. Perhaps this moment would be the decisive one in their lives. And maybe she wasn't ready for it, but she couldn't let fear control her fate. Marilou froze in place, unable to believe her eyes. Her fiancé, with whom they had planned their future together, was leaving with a strange woman. They disappeared behind the house door together, and Marilou's heart was filled with despair. What did this mean? She tried to convince herself that it could be just a work meeting or an accident, but uncertainty and fear had already settled deep in her soul. Determined to find out more, Marilou called Kenton. She dialed his number, and when she heard his voice, she felt everything inside her break. "Hi, Kenton. Where are you?" she asked, trying to sound calm. "I'm at work," Kenton replied. His voice was as calm and confident as ever. "It's been a busy day. Is everything okay?" asked Marilou, feeling her heart pounding. "Yes, I'm fine," he replied, but something in his tone betrayed that he was lying. Marilou felt a cold shiver run down her spine, but decided not to jump to conclusions. "Okay, I'll see you tonight then," she said, trying to hide her excitement. She said goodbye, but there were still many unanswered questions in her heart. That evening, when Kenton returned home, Marilou tried to appear calm, but her heart was beating faster than usual. She watched him, silently, trying to understand if everything was really okay. Kenton talked about his normal day at work, but the more he talked, the more suspicion arose in her mind. "You were late today," she said, looking up at him. "Yeah, it was really busy," Kenton replied, his voice sounding unnatural. When Kenton went to the bathroom, Marilou felt like she couldn't take it anymore. Her mind racing, she decided to look at his phone. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the list of calls and messages. Several unfamiliar numbers and a confirmation of a purchase at a jewelry store made her heart sink. What was he buying? And for whom? She thought, feeling her anxiety building. Kenton turned and noticed that Marilou was holding his phone. For a moment, his face looked suspicious, but he quickly composed himself. "Why do you need my phone?" he asked calmly, trying to hide his emotions. "I wanted to set the alarm," Marilou lied, her voice trembling. She could feel the sweat on her forehead. Kenton looked at her curiously, but did not continue the conversation. They both knew there was already some tension between them that seemed inevitable. The next day, Marilou decided not to hide her suspicions any longer. She called her best friend Louisa, hoping to get support. "Louise, I need to talk to you," she said when she heard voices on the line. "What's wrong, Marilou?" asked Louise, anxiously. "It's about Kenton. I saw him with a stranger," Marilou replied, her voice sounding thin and shaky. "With whom? What's going on?" asked Louise, sensing the tension in her friend's voice. "I don't know what to think. I saw him go into the house with a woman I didn't recognize." Marilou tried to hold back her tears, but failed. "You need to find out the truth," Louise advised, her voice determined. "Follow him. Find out what he's really doing." It was a difficult decision for Marilou, because she did not want to spy on her fiancé. But her suspicions had already penetrated so deeply into her mind that she couldn't let things go. The next day, when Kenton left the house, Marilou stayed in the shadows and followed him. She tried to keep her distance without drawing attention to herself. Kenton was indeed on his way to the office, as he had said, but something in his behavior seemed suspicious to Marilou. He suddenly changed his route and walked in the direction of the same apartment block where Marilou had seen him earlier. "No, not again," she whispered, her heart racing as she noticed another woman waiting for Kenton at the doorway. Marilou began to feel her soul tearing up. She could not believe what she was seeing. As the woman hugged Kenton, Marilou felt herself vomiting. She could no longer hold back her emotions. "Louise, this is too much," she said, calling her friend. "He's with someone else. I can't take it any more." "What did you see?" asked Louise, trying to calm Maria down. "They're hugging. He's cheating on me," Mary Lou exclaimed bitterly, her voice torn with anger and frustration. "You have to come home." "Calm down and we'll think it over," Louise said, feeling Mary Lou shaking violently. Mary Lou slowly walked away from the scene she no longer wanted to be a part of. Her heart was torn apart and she felt that the trust she had placed in Kenton had vanished in an instant. She knew she had to find answers, but now it didn't seem so easy. She dialed Louise's number again. "I don't know what to do," she said, feeling tears start to roll down her cheeks. "First, stay calm," Louise repeated. "We can solve this together." Mary Lou nodded, even though she knew that the trust between her and Kenton would never be the same. Now she had to think about her future again. Was it worth continuing this relationship when it was so damaging? Could she ever love Kenton again if she knew he had been cheating on her? These questions kept coming back to her like ominous shadows, and although she wanted to figure it out, her heart felt afraid of the unknown. Mary Lou was stunned by what she saw. Everything that had seemed so stable and secure in her relationship with Kenton was crumbling right before her eyes. She stood by as if in a dream and watched him, holding a stranger's hand, enter the very house that had become a symbol of her suspicions. Her heart was heavy with pain, but Mary Lou knew this was no time for emotion. She had a decision to make, and she decided to act. As she walked back to her home, she could feel her thoughts swirling around in her head like butterflies that couldn't find a way out. "What am I going to do? I can't live like this anymore," she thought. When Kenton came into the apartment that evening, Mary Lou already knew she would not be able to look him in the eye. He acted as if nothing had happened, talking about work stuff and suggesting a plan for the weekend. "Would you like to go to your grandmother's for the weekend?" he asked, a smile on his face. Mary Lou nodded, but her insides were boiling. How can he lie so calmly? She asked herself over and over again. She felt like something inside her was crumbling. That evening, Mary Lou decided to call Louise. Her friend was always there for her, ready to listen and support her. When she came to see her, Louise's face shone with kindness and care. "Mary Lou, you look upset," Louise said as they sat in the kitchen drinking hot coffee. "Louise," Mary Lou began, sighing deeply, "I can't take it anymore. I know he's cheating on me, and he doesn't even hide it. I saw him with a stranger." Louise listened carefully, then nodded. "You know, Mary Lou," she said, "you've done everything you can. Now you just have to decide if you want to continue living this life of lies. You've already seen him with 2 different women, and you know it's not a coincidence." Mary Lou nodded in response, realizing that there was no more room for doubt. She was in pain, but she couldn't turn a blind eye to what was happening. "I've decided to leave Kenton," she announced, and felt her heart lighten as she said the words. The next day, Mary Lou left work early and went to see the doctor Louise had recommended. She knew that she had to take care of her health, and this visit was going to be another drop in the bucket of her decisions. On the way to the clinic, she unexpectedly saw Kenton again with a stranger. This time, she didn't even try to call him or justify what she had seen. Her decision was final. "It's too much," she whispered, feeling her heart clench in her chest. She knew she couldn't stay in this relationship any longer. Kenton was betraying her, not only physically, but emotionally as well, as he lied to her face every day. Mary Lou received a call from Louise to share her discovery. "I just saw him again. It was no accident, Louisa. I cannot stay with a man who is cheating on me," she exclaimed. "Act, Mary Lou. Act now," Louise replied, feeling her emotions. "You deserve better than this. You don't have to take this anymore." The same day Kenton returned home, Mary Lou was waiting for him with a solution. She wasn't going to make a scene, but her inner resolve was unshakable. When Kenton entered the room, Mary Lou looked him calmly in the eye and said, "I know everything, and I'm leaving you." Kenton froze in place, unable to believe what he was hearing. "What are you talking about, Mary Lou?" he asked, trying to sound confident. "I saw you with that woman," she replied, her voice firm. "I can't take your lies anymore." "It's not what you think," he began to argue. "It's just a work colleague. We have nothing." "It doesn't matter," she said, holding back tears. "You're cheating on me, and I can't live with it anymore. I've made up my mind." Kenton tried to argue further, but Mary Lou wasn't listening anymore. She knew she had made the right choice. She packed her things and left for Louise's. When Mary Lou left the apartment, she felt both pain and relief. It was the end, but also a new beginning. She was finally free of the lie that had been weighing on her life. "I did it," she said as she entered Louise's apartment. "I left him." Louise hugged Maria, sensing her relief. "It was the right decision, Mary Lou. Now you can focus on yourself and your life," she said. "Yes, I feel free," Mary Lou replied, knowing that she could now start a new chapter. "It's going to be hard, but I'm ready." "Know that I'm always here for you," Louise assured her. Mary Lou smiled, feeling hope reawaken in her heart. "Thank you, Louise. I knew I could rely on you," she said. She sat down at the table, and together they began to discuss plans for the future, feeling that this difficult stage was behind them. Mary Lou had a new goal: to rebuild her life and find happiness. Although the road ahead would not be easy, she knew she was ready for any challenges that lay ahead. Mary Lou sat in Louise's car, wringing her hands and staring out the window as if trying to disappear into the night city. Her thoughts were chaotic, but one thing was clear: she would no longer be part of a life based on lies. Louise remained silent beside her, knowing that her friend needed time to process what had happened. "Thank you for picking me up," Mary Lou said quietly, keeping her gaze fixed on the window. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Her voice trembled, as if each word weighed more than she could bear. Louise just nodded and replied, "You did the right thing, Mary Lou. You don't need to endure any more. You deserve the truth and a man who will not betray you." After this short conversation, the car plunged into silence. Mary Lou felt devastated, but at the same time she felt that she had taken the first step towards freedom. Her entire world, which had seemed so solid before, had fallen apart, but this gave her the opportunity to build something new. When they arrived at Louise's apartment, Mary Lou took her things and went inside in silence. She was deep in thought, and her friend did not insist on talking. They knew each other well enough to know when silence was needed. In her apartment, Louisa Mary Lou sat down on the sofa, feeling her body finally begin to relax. This place was safe for her, away from Kenton and his lies. She put her hands in her lap and cried for the first time in a long time. "You're strong, Mary Lou," Louise said, sitting down next to her. "What you did today took a lot of strength." Mary Lou looked up at her, her eyes red with tears. "I just don't know what's going to happen next. I thought that Kenton and I would be together forever. We were planning a wedding, dreaming of children, of our home. And now it all fell apart in one moment. How could I have been so wrong about a man? Perhaps he just wasn't who you thought he was. Sometimes we close our eyes to what we don't want to see. But now you see everything clearly. You freed yourself from it and now you can move on," Louise said, trying to encourage her friend. "Move on." Mary Lou felt her words hanging in the air. The idea seemed alien to her. Everything she knew, all her plans for the future, were tied to Kenton. And now it all seemed like a distant dream that had collapsed before her eyes. The next day, when Mary Lou woke up in Louise's apartment, she felt a strange sense of peace. It was hard to believe that she had left Kenton. This decision still seemed unreal. But the new day gave her the strength to continue. After breakfast, Mary Lou decided she couldn't put off her plans any longer. She wanted to find out the truth about her health, especially about the misdiagnosis she had received at the clinic. "Louise, I don't want to wait any longer. I have to find out what happened," she said as they sat at the table. "I support you, Mary Lou," Louise said as she poured herself a cup of coffee. "You need to find out what's going on. We'll go together if you want. It would be better than going alone." "I want to take this clinic to court," Mary Lou replied, her voice filled with determination. "You're right," Louisa nodded. "You should. Not only for your sake, but also for the sake of other people who might be deceived by them. But right now, the most important thing is you. You need to take care of yourself and your health." The same day, Marilou went to see the gynecologist Louisa had recommended. After a thorough examination, the doctor assured her that all the previous test results were wrong and that she was healthy. This gave Mary Lou a sense of relief, but it also fueled her anger towards the clinic that had misdiagnosed her. "I can't believe I've been through so much because of their mistake," Mary Lou said as they returned home. "I need others to know about this." Back in Louise, Mary Lou was determined to take action. "We have to write an article about this," she said. "Other people need to know that this clinic is cheating their patients." Louise smiled. "You are a real shark of a writer, Mary Lou. I'm going to help you with this. We will give them a real public trial." "That will be my mission," Mary Lou replied, feeling her heart rekindle. "I want this clinic to be held accountable for what they have done. I will not allow them to destroy other people's lives anymore." That evening, as they worked on the article, Mary Lou felt something new awaken inside her. "You know," she began, "I don't want to be a victim anymore. I want to fight and find my strength." "And you will," Louise assured her. "We will get through this together." Mary Lou smiled, feeling her friend's support fill her with new energy. "Thank you, Louisa. You've always been there for me when I needed you." "I'll always be here for you," Louise replied, hugging Maria. When they finished the article, Mary Lou felt her life gradually returning to normal. She was no longer the scared woman who was afraid of the truth. Now she was ready to fight, not only for herself, but for others. The next day, after the article was published, Mary Lou received several messages from people who had experienced similar situations. Her story really resonated. "Louise, look how many people are supporting us," she exclaimed, showing her phone screen to her friend. "That's great, Mary Lou. You've made a huge step," Louise said. "This is just the beginning." Mary Lou smiled, knowing that she could finally hope for the best. She was ready for new challenges and new opportunities. Although there was still some pain in her heart, she knew that she could now rebuild her life with truth and strength. Mary Lou and Lucia sat down with their laptops, ready for an important mission, to expose clinic fraudsters who were profiting from people's health and fears. Mary Lou had mixed feelings about this project. Writing about her experiences was painful, as each line reminded her of the time when she was sure her life was ruined. But with every keystroke, she felt her pain transform into strength. This article was the beginning of a new chapter for her. "This should not be just an article," Mary Lou said, looking at the screen. "It has to be a cry for justice. They can no longer deceive people by making false diagnoses for money." Louise listened intently, then added, "We will tell everything. How they manipulated the results, threatened serious consequences, and offered expensive treatment that was not necessary. And, of course, we have to mention their methods, the discounts and promotions they tried to lure people with." Writing was difficult, but Mary Lou felt that it was her way to recovery, not only physical but also moral. In a few hours, the first drafts of the article were ready. "Louise," Mary Lou paused for a moment, looking at the screen. "Do you think I should mention Kenton? That he was also part of this nightmare? I still can't believe he was indifferent enough to lie to my face when it was so obvious." Louise shook her head. "I think we should focus on what's important, the clinic and what they did. Kenton is a different story. Although I understand that his behavior hurts just as much." Mary Lou nodded. She understood that Kenton's issue was still unresolved, but today was not about him. She was focused on justice for herself and others. The next day, Mary Lou met with the lawyer Louise had recommended. He was attentive and focused, listened to her story, asked her a few questions and finally said, "Your chances of winning this case are quite high, given all the information you have provided. But you will need to prepare for a long process. But I am sure that the truth will be on your side." These words were a new breath of air for Marilou. Now she could see a clear path ahead of her. "Thank you for believing in me," she replied with a smile. "I am ready to fight." Over the next few weeks, Marilou and Louisa worked on the final version of the article. They learned that the clinic had already been the subject of several investigations, but that their activities had been covered up. Now that was about to change. One morning, as Mary Lou sat with a cup of coffee by the window of Louisa's apartment, her phone rang. It was Kenton. At first, she hesitated to answer it, but eventually decided to pick it up. "Mary Lou, we need to talk," he said in a slightly anxious voice. "It can't stay like this. I can explain everything." She was silent for a few seconds, collecting her thoughts. Finally, Mary Lou exhaled. "Okay, Kenton. I'll see you tonight." It was important to her to put this matter to rest for good. That evening, as they sat in the cafe, Mary Lou looked at Kenton as if he were someone she no longer recognized. "Mary Lou," he began, "I bought the apartment for us. Those women you saw were just the agent and the owner of the apartment. I wanted to surprise you, to give you our home together, but things didn't turn out the way I planned." "Kenton," Mary Lou said calmly, "I can't go on like this. Even if you're telling the truth, even if this was really just an attempt to surprise me, I can't trust you anymore. Our relationship will always be marred by these doubts." He wanted to say something in response, but was silent. His look indicated that he knew nothing more would change her mind. They said goodbye, and it was goodbye forever. When Marilou left the cafe, she felt an unusual lightness. She walked down the street, listening to the sounds of the evening city, and realized that her path was now clear. She was free from lies, from betrayals, and from the past that was pulling her back. When Marilou returned home, she sat down at her laptop. "Louise," she exclaimed, "I just met with Kenton. And you know what? I told him I can't trust him anymore." "That's wonderful, Mary Lou. You finally did it." Louise put down her book and came closer. "Yes, I feel like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Now I can concentrate on our article," Marilou said, diving back into her work. They worked on the article for several days. Each line was written with new inspiration. "You know," Louisa began one day, "I always knew you were strong, but the way you're fighting now is amazing. Thank you, but it's not just me. It's all of us." "You've been my support through everything," Marilou replied, smiling. When the article was finally ready, Marilou felt incredibly excited. They decided to publish it in a local newspaper, a big step in their fight for justice. "We're going to do it," Marilou said, looking at the finished text. "This will be the beginning of something big." When the article was published, the response was overwhelming. People started sharing her story, and Mary Lou received many messages of support. "Louise, look at this. People are actually concerned about this. They are writing to say they are ready to testify against the clinic," she exclaimed with joy. "That's incredible, Mary Lou." "Your courage inspires others," Louise replied, hugging her friend. This success gave Mary Lou the feeling that she had finally taken control of her life. She was ready to fight not only for herself but also for others. Her heart was filled with hope, and she knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey. Louise smiled and hugged her friend. "I'm glad you finally worked it out. Now we need to focus on getting your life back and making it even better." "You're right," Mary Lou replied, feeling hopeful in her heart. "I'm ready for a change." For the next few weeks, Mary Lou threw herself into the work of the court case against the clinic. She and her lawyer carefully prepared all the documents, gathered evidence, and recruited other affected patients who had also fallen victim to the scheme. Marilou couldn't believe how many people had fallen into the same trap as her. But now she felt a responsibility to fight not only for herself, but for others as well. "I never knew it was so common," she told Louisa one day as she read the testimonies of other patients. "It's just awful." "Yes, but now we have the opportunity to make a difference," Louise replied, supporting her friend. "We have to make sure that their fraudulent business ceases to exist." There was little time left to reflect on the past. She focused on the future and how to change her life for the better. After several visits to the doctor, Marilou was finally convinced that her health was fine, and now she could dream of having a family again, but without fear and anxiety. "I'm starting to feel normal," she told Louise when they were having coffee together. "I even dream of having children." "That's great, Marilou. You deserve to be happy," Louise replied, smiling. However, thoughts of Kenton still occasionally crossed her mind, but they no longer caused her pain. Marilou began to realize that her love for him was based on an illusion, on an ideal image she had created. She didn't love him, but the version of Kenton she wanted to see. "I feel it's time to close this chapter," Louise told Marilou one evening. "I don't want him to influence my life anymore." "That's the right decision," Louisa nodded. "You deserve to be happy without him." One evening, after a busy day, Marilou was sitting at home working on an article about her story for the newspaper. When Louise walked into the room and saw Marilou deep in her work, she nodded her approval. "I think this article will be your best piece yet," Louise said with a smile. "I hope this story helps others," Marilou replied, looking up from the screen. "I went through all this for a reason. It shouldn't go unnoticed." "You can change the world," Louise encouraged. "Your story can inspire many people." They talked for a long time that evening, discussing Marilou's future plans. She decided not only to focus on journalism, but also to help people in similar situations. This became her new goal, to fight for justice and use her experience to change the world for the better. One day, Marilou received a letter from her lawyer. The court had set a date for a hearing on her lawsuit against the clinic. It was an important step in her life. "Louise, we have news," Marilou exclaimed as she opened the letter. "The trial will take place next month." "That's incredible, Marilou," said Louise, rejoicing with her friend. "Now you are really on the road to justice." That evening, she wrote the last lines of an article that was going to make a real impact. "We're ready," she told Louise as she closed her laptop. Now the real fight begins. When the article was published, it caused a stir. People began to reach out to Marilou, thanking her for sharing her story and opening the eyes of many to the clinic's fraud. "I never knew this was possible," wrote one reader. "Thank you for talking about it." It was the moment Marilou realized that her pain had been turned into a force to help others. "This is a real change," she told Louise when she received another message of support. "You are a real hero," Louise replied, hugging her friend. "Your courage inspires people." Gradually, with the support of Louise and her new friends, Marilou built a new life. Her story is an example of how, after the deepest fall, you can rise again and find new meanings. At the trial, she spoke with confidence and determination, describing how the clinic had broken her trust and tried to profit from her fears. "I don't want to be silent anymore," she said, addressing the court. "This is not just about me, but about many other people." Her speech made a strong impression. "Your story is inspiring," the judge said after her speech. "We will consider your evidence very seriously." In the end, the court ruled in her favor. The clinic was found guilty of fraud, and their operations ceased. "It was a great victory for me," Marilou Louise said as they celebrated their success. "I feel that I have managed to close this chapter of my life." "You are a real heroine," Louisa replied, raising her glass. "To your victory." Her path was now clear, to help others and continue her fight for the truth. "I want to create an organization to support victims," Marilou shared her plans. "This will be my calling." Though her story with Kenton left deep scars, Mary Lou knew that it was the ordeal that made her stronger. "I am no longer the girl who blindly believed in promises," she thought. "I am now a woman who is ready to fight for the truth." Marilou could now look to the future without fear or doubt. "I'm free," she whispered to herself, smiling at the horizons of new possibilities. And this freedom was the greatest gift she could have received after all she had been through. She felt a new hope blossom in her heart and was ready for all the new challenges that lay ahead.